Hey guys, tonight we slip into the hushed corridors of ancient Constantinople, where the stone floors echo softly beneath felted slippers, and the scent of old parchment lingers in air that hasn't been exciting in centuries. The marble walls are cool to the touch, the torchlight flickers lazily and deep in the palace complex. A man with an aching back and an armful of scrolls is preparing for another day of crushing monotony. You're that man, or at least you're following close behind him, the way one might trail a cloud quietly, invisibly. The sky is already that flat pale gray. That means the sun is up, but not really trying. You blink away the sleep crusted at the corner of your eyes and trudge through the hall of administrative persistence, a real place tragically, and prepare for a day full of thrilling activities like confirming that yesterday's reports were received and signed, and then rechecked by 3 other men who also cannot remember why they're doing any of this. You probably won't survive this, at least not without dozing off at some point, which is kind of the point. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to comment your location and what time you're watching this, because yes, it is probably too late to still be awake. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You settle behind your little cedarwood desk, which is too short for your knees and too high for your elbows, and begin your day's task, reviewing the receipts from the previous day's ink distribution. Yes, that's a real job. You count tiny vials of imported indigo ink, each one sealed with a dull lead cap and marked with a scribe's personal sigil, usually a lopsided star or a very tired eagle. The marble floor is cold under your sandals, and your toes ache from the chill. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the clink of someone knocking over a penknife, which is the most action you'll get this morning. The room around you is shaped like an octagon for no good reason. It was once a waiting chamber for dignitaries, but now it holds 6 desks, and a lot of groaning men in robes that smell faintly of vinegar and disappointment. You unroll the first scroll with the care of someone handling a sacred relic. Not because it is sacred, no, it's a receipt for papyrus stock from Alexandria, but because you'll be personally flogged if you rip it. That's a fringe but factual practice. If you destroy certain documents even accidentally, you're fined a month's salary or assigned latrine transcription duty. Yes, that's real. Someone somewhere records the inventory of state toilets as your quill scratches over a record of 2 measures of parchment, 4 amphorae ink, 1 small bronze weight. You feel your soul detach slightly from your body. A colleague, Nikephoros, whose only notable skill is keeping his sleeves clean, walks by and sighs loudly. He always sighs loudly. Historians still argue whether men like Nikephoros were genuinely burdened by the weight of imperial administration, or simply addicted to the sound of their own importance. He stops and peers over your shoulder. "You missed a flourish," he says, pointing to the signature line where you forgot to add the decorative loop around the P. That loop, by the way, takes a full 10 seconds to draw and has no legal bearing on anything. "I was distracted by the thought of death," you murmur. He nods solemnly, a common sentiment. You reach for your breakfast, a small plate of olives and a heel of bread. It tastes like parchment, which, by the way, is made from sheepskin and smells remarkably similar to what you're writing on. There's a jug of watered wine nearby, the acceptable office beverage, because even bureaucracy can't be faced sober in Byzantium. Overhead, the dome ceiling bears a mosaic of an angel holding a scroll. Her expression is vague pity. You like to think she understands. You glance at the hourglass by the door. It's the state-regulated sand timer designed to keep clerks from taking overly long lavatory breaks. The sand falls slowly, rhythmically. You watch it for longer than you should, your eyes drifting. There is a knock at the door. It opens slowly, as if even the door is tired of being here, and in walks Theophanes, your direct superior. He's wearing the purple-trimmed robe of the mid-rank document review. Council Sub-East Wing. That sounds important, but it's really just a glorified paper shuffler. Still, he acts like he's walking into battle. He leans in. We've had a parchment discrepancy. You blink. How many 3 sheets? Possibly 4. You both stare at each other in silence. Parchment costs were monitored with a vigilance normally reserved for state secrets. If someone misplaced 4 sheets, a subcommittee would have to be formed. You rub your temple. You'll be required to draw up a statement of materials lost or unreasonably relocated. You don't speak. You just nod slowly, like a man who has heard the verdict and is already planning his final meal. Later in the day, you'll sit in on the records confirmation assembly, which sounds more exciting than it is. You'll listen to a man named Maximos read from a list of confirmed forms in alphabetical order, in a monotone voice that could put a hummingbird into a coma. Once, during a particularly long confirmation, someone in the back started snoring and fell off their stool. No one even looked up. You shuffle your papers again, more out of habit than necessity. You have already rechecked the ink logs twice. There are no errors, but you check them again because that's what's expected. The empire thrives not on action, but on the illusion of motion. Outside your small high window, the day continues. People walk boats, glide along the Bosphorus. The occasional shout rises from the forum. But here inside the Bureau of Forms and Proper Address, Western Annex time flows differently, slower, sleepier, as if lulled into submission by the scratching of quills and the dry rustle of papyrus. And yet, somehow the system works, or at least it doesn't collapse. That's the magic of the Byzantine bureaucracy. It exists in spite of itself. A vast, creaking ceremonial machine where every cog knows its place, even if no one knows what the machine actually does. You lean back in your creaky chair. The wood groans. So do you. Another scroll. Another day. The scroll before you is labeled Ink Usage Register, 42nd Fiscal Subcycle, and you can already feel your brain trying to shut down. You straighten your spine with the kind of determination reserved for monks or people facing mild but inescapable torture. The ink register is 3 feet long and written in such tightly packed lettering that you squint involuntarily just looking at it. Your fingers find their rhythm, unroll smooth. Glance, sigh, tick a box. Each section of the scroll is signed off by someone with a title, like Assistant Sub-Adjunct of Regional Quill Oversight. These aren't fake positions. These are real titles, handed out by the Empire proudly, ceremonially, and absolutely without irony. Every page includes the date, location, quantity of ink, dispensed, the name of the recipient, and a column labeled Purpose, which 80% of the time just says official use. You pause when you see an outlier. Someone has scribbled decorative calligraphy for office pigeon labels. It's oddly specific. It's also a real thing. Carrier pigeons are everywhere in the empire, and their labels must be handwritten in elegant Greek script, often with gold leaf accents. The man who designed the imperial pigeon tag format, Dionysios the Younger, insisted that even birds of the state deserved bureaucratic dignity. Historians still argue whether Dionysios believed this, or was simply mocking the system from the inside. You take a moment to appreciate how the word dignity has so little place in your daily duties. You reach for your inkwell. It's low. You're not allowed to refill it yourself, that's the job of the ink attendant. So you ring the tiny bronze bell next to your desk. It makes a dull, unimpressive tink. A full 3 minutes pass before someone appears. It's Thalasios, a boy of perhaps 14, wearing a robe far too large for him and balancing a tray of ink pots like a clumsy waiter. He sloshes one onto your desk and gives you a nod that suggests he too has begun to dissociate from this world. You nod back. In silence, your souls bond briefly over the shared futility of everything. Now where were you? Ah, yes, pigeon labels. The rhythm picks back up. Scratch, pause, scratch, yawn. You're not allowed to draft any documents before cross-checking all materials on the previous week's inventory. And that means you're not just reading ink logs, but matching them against scribe shift records, papyrus requisitions, and quill usage charts. This is the Byzantine Empire after all. A land of laws, faith, and forms, so many forms. There are forms for receiving forms. Forms that describe other forms. Forms that must be destroyed and then logged in a separate destruction of form. And above all, there is the Holy Registry. A ledger so enormous it takes 3 oxen to carry it. Okay, that's an exaggeration. It takes 4. The Holy Registry is stored in a temperature-regulated room underneath the main archive, surrounded by guards' humidity control devices, made of clay jars and sea salt, and one man whose job it is to brush off dust twice daily. No one actually reads it, but it must exist. The Empire has decreed it. You hear a chair creak across the room. Someone is standing. That's unusual. It's Marinos, the quiet one. He clears his throat. I have finished copying Form 24D in duplicate. Murmurs of interest ripple across the room. Duplicate without a missing margin. Bold. Dangerous. You applaud weakly, partly because the tedium has left you craving any kind of stimulus, and partly because Marinos is the only one who still bothers to wear both shoes every day. The rest of your colleagues, like you, have embraced various degrees of foot freedom. The rest of the day is spent preparing for a very important task, re-inking the tax scroll headings. This involves painting a faintly red underline under every major heading to indicate priority. There are guidelines for how slanted the line may be, how thick and how far it must sit from the baseline text. There's an actual imperial standard on it. The red rule of 810 AD, established after a tax scroll, was once misread because the underline intersected a th. The result, a minor uprising in one border town and an inconvenient amount of public arson. And so now you have rules. So many rules. The underlining process is a delicate art. You hold your breath carefully, guide your quill across the fragile page, and try not to sneeze. One wrong move and you'll have to start again and file a correction notice form AIA23F. Someone across the room coughs violently, which startles you and causes your quill to wobble. You silently curse them and prepare the correction form. You've memorized most of it by now. Meanwhile, your deskmate Photios is working on a letter requesting permission to copy another letter that requests permission to acquire surplus wax tablets. This is normal. This is fine. You lean back and look at the ceiling. You've stared at these same frescoes for so many years you've begun naming the cherubs. That one with the lazy eye is Aristarchos. The one with the weirdly long toe, that's Basil. You sometimes imagine they're stuck in their own bureaucratic hell, eternally filing cloud maintenance requests in Heaven's Department of Divine Oversight. Lunch is delivered on a wheeled cart. It's lentils again, always lentils. You spoon them into your mouth, slowly, carefully, like each one is a tiny bean-shaped prayer for freedom. And yet, weirdly, you feel a sort of comfort. There's something meditative about the repetition, the predictability. You always know what to expect. The empire may be complicated, over-engineered, and allergic to efficiency, but it is constant. You're never surprised. That in its own way is soothing. There is no danger here, no chaos, just endless scrolls, endless ink, and the occasional comforting sound of someone quietly snoring behind a column. You return to your work. There's a blot on your tunic from earlier, probably Thalassios's fault, but you don't care enough to be upset. You're too busy triple-checking the ink budget for the Western Scribal Quarter. One line catches your eye. Excess ink sent to subterranean storage vault. Subterranean vault? That sounds exciting, mysterious, a little dramatic. You briefly imagine an underground chamber full of glowing vials and flickering torches. Maybe there's a hidden passage, a secret society of rebellious scribes. Maybe there's treasure, or more likely, just more forms. You sigh, finish the record, and seal the scroll with the office's wooden stamp. It says in Greek, approved by the Third Desk Ink Division. And just like that, another hour of your life is gone. Categorized, approved, forgotten. You stretch your fingers, flexing them one by one, like a bored concert pianist preparing to perform a sonata called Redundant Procedures in D minor. Across the desk is your next tormentor, a chart of court titles and their corresponding robes. Yes, a whole chart. For robes, you're not making that up. The scroll creaks as you unroll it and scan the hierarchy of titles, each more confusing and ceremonial than the last. There's the Proto-Socrates, who is basically the imperial head of paperwork. Then there's the Mystikos, who might be an intelligence officer or just someone with exclusive lunch privileges. Historians still argue about what his job actually involved. The names sound important, but their real duties lost in centuries of vague Latin-Greek job descriptions and a complete disinterest in ever simplifying anything. You, of course, are a humble hypographos, which sounds like you write subpar graphs, but is actually just a fancy way to say junior note-taker with dreams of slightly less junior note-taking. Your robe is a shade of beige, so uninspiring it actively drains color from nearby furniture. You glance up as Isidore walks in Chartularios to Kanikleu, which translates roughly to keeper of the imperial inkpot. That's right. Someone's whole job is to oversee the golden ink used by the emperor. You'd think he was guarding the Ark of the Covenant the way he carries himself. Robe deep purple with embroidered gold sleeves. Hat ridiculously tall. Attitude smug enough to float off the ground. He doesn't speak to you. He doesn't need to. He just passes through your office like a holy relic being paraded past the peasants. You bow slightly because protocol says you must. You imagine briefly tripping him, just once, just a little. Bureaucratic rank in the Byzantine world isn't about what you do. It's about how elaborate your title is and how many tassels are attached to your clothing. Tassels, by the way, are color-coded gold, means imperial business. Red means religious paperwork, and green indicates grain distribution. There's a whole miniature textile code that determines who can enter which hallway. Once an assistant was banished to the stables for entering a corridor while wearing the wrong sash. The obsession with order becomes even more baffling when you learn that many of these jobs overlap or contradict each other. For instance, the logothete of the drome is responsible for the postal system and foreign affairs, while the epitochrysotrychlino arranges palace banquets and occasionally signs off on weather reports for ceremonies. Why, no one knows. The system evolved like a coral reef, layer upon layer, built for survival, not clarity. You once met a man who claimed to be the deputy sub-treasurer for naval linen requisition. You asked what that meant. He shrugged and said, "I count towels." At your next meeting, if it can be called, that you and 7 others gather in a circle around a marble table to review the updated list of official titles. Not their duties, just the names, your role proofreading for duplicated prefixes. Because you wouldn't want someone to accidentally be named Mega Grand Super Notary when Grand Mega Notary is already taken. The meeting is chaired by a man named Konstantinos, whose position is the anagnostes of honorific assignments. His main job is to ensure that everyone feels their title is sufficiently grand. You've seen him spend 10 minutes debating whether esteemed should come before or after worthy in someone's appointment parchment. Worthy esteemed suggests historical depth. He says stroking his beard, but esteemed worthy sounds more elegant. No one responds. You're all too deep in your own private fugues. Even the official who reads out assignments has a title, the proclamator of rotated decrees. His robe features a trim made from peacock feathers. Peacock feathers. He wears sandals lined with felt, so his steps remain silent, as tradition dictates that proclamations must be heard before the announcer is seen. It's also performative. You wonder how anyone remembers what their jobs are supposed to be. Your desk is stacked with documents requesting title clarifications. One is from a man who's been referred to as Exarch of the Northern Tally Chamber for 12 years, but has just discovered that his office was technically absorbed by the logothete of fiscal tallies 3 reigns ago. Now he doesn't know if he exists, bureaucratically anyway. You file a response. Your position remains valid until invalidated by formal revision. Continue duties under existing nomenclature, pending imperial clarification. Translation: don't panic. Keep doing whatever it is you do. One of the more bizarre cases you recall involved the keeper of the sacred staple, whose official job was to maintain the imperial binding clasp used in royal decree bundles. The staple itself was gold-shaped like a cross and stored in a box made of ebony and paranoia. When it went missing for 6 hours, it sparked a full internal investigation and temporary fasting among mid-level scribes. It was later found under a cushion. Historians still argue whether the staple incident was a symbolic test orchestrated by the emperor to weed out disloyal clerks, or if someone just sat on it. You pause to drink from your cup of watered wine, letting the silence of the office settle like a thick layer of dust. There's a gentle scratching from across the room as someone writes with extra flourish, the soft sound of bureaucratic vanity. Sometimes you think about quitting. But then what would you do? Sell olives, herd goats. The bureaucracy may be pointless, but at least it's predictably pointless. Out there in the real world, chaos reigns. Here it's just confusion with a dress code. You straighten a pile of forms and feel a strange sense of pride when the corners align perfectly. You stack them by office, by title, by date of issuance. This is your kingdom now. As you return to your scroll, you catch a glimpse of your reflection in the burnished bronze inkwell. Your eyes are bloodshot, your expression vacant. Your robe has a mustard stain from 3 days ago. You are officially under scribe of internal records for title verification. You've made it. You sit once again in the same creaky-backed chair, your spine molded to its awkward contours like you were poured into it centuries ago. Today's assignment: reviewing procurement documents for a recent shipment of Brace Yourself reeds. That's right, reeds, specifically reeds for quill production. Sorted by length, width, moisture content, and resilience under duress, whatever that means. The bundle of scrolls smells faintly like river mud, probably because half of them are actual reed samples tied into the margins. You run your finger over one and it crumbles into a fine dust. Beautiful. You sneeze, quietly, respectfully. This shipment allegedly came from the Nile Delta by way of Alexandria via 2 tax-evading merchants and a single poorly handled camel incident. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine state's obsession with supply chain documentation made trade more efficient or merely more exhausting. You lean toward exhausting. You flip to a page titled Standardized Testing of Reed Compliance. There are charts describing ideal reed curvature, charts describing color gradation, even a snap strength test. Apparently, one particular breed of river reed was banned after too many broke mid-sentence, during imperial decrees leading to diplomatic confusion and at least one fistfight in the court of Trebizond. The court's official explanation: ink was dishonored. You laugh softly. It echoes more than it should. Someone looks up annoyed. You go back to examining the reeds. The documents are dull, but they tell a story, a tedious, slow-moving story, of an empire obsessed with order, regulation, and endless documentation. There's a form for who picked the reeds, a form for how many were too soft, a form for why they were too soft. One particularly poetic entry reads, "Blame the sun. It kissed the water too long this year." Someone got philosophical in the margins. You appreciate it. Your job, of course, is not to appreciate. Your job is to check that each signature matches the regional style guide. Eastern provinces use a curlier sigma. Western ones are pointier. And heaven forbid you mistake a Thracian loop for a Cappadocian flourish. People have been demoted for less. You check the signature log. One entry stands out: a man named Philotheos. The elder has signed twice, once under inspector of reed bundles, and again under moral evaluator tools and implements. Is this a clerical error or a case of double employment? Either way, a violation. You write up an incident memo form I-78B and note: possible overlapping duty. Refer to staffing clarifier. Philotheos may be 87 years old and legally blind, but if he's violating Section 4.2 of the Procurement Integrity Code, you're obligated to report him. The empire does not care for excuses. It cares for paperwork. The reed shipment documents are interspersed with letters of complaint. One scribe claims the reeds caused hand cramps. Another says a reed splinter entered his knuckle and gave him divine visions. That one was transferred to the monastic archives where he now catalogs dreams. Voluntarily. You sip from your cracked clay mug. The wine is thin, the kind made for civil servants and other hopeless souls. A soft clatter draws your eye to a nearby table where a junior clerk has dropped an entire container of seal wax pellets. They scatter like bugs fleeing a torch. No one helps him. He sighs, begins picking them up, one at a time. Your thoughts drift again to the logistics of this place. Every reed, every sheet of parchment, every jar of ink has to be shipped, logged, blessed, categorized, inspected, redistributed, stamped, archived, and in some cases sung over. Not metaphorically. There is a ceremonial chant performed annually in the Imperial Supplies Office, the Hymn of the Quill. Legend has it that if the hymn is skipped, the year's documents will be plagued by smudges and bureaucratic disasters. Historians still argue whether the hymn ever actually warded off errors, or if it was just a way to make middle management feel special for 5 minutes a year. You shift in your chair. The sunlight has changed angles now, slicing across the room and illuminating the layer of dust hovering in the air like bureaucratic glitter. Somewhere a pigeon coos softly from a windowsill. You wonder if it's one of the labeled ones. Probably not. It lacks the smug air of state employment. You read a report stating that one entire batch of reeds was rejected for being too optimistic in appearance. The implication being that official instruments must reflect imperial dignity, which apparently means sullen and practical. You're not sure what a cheerful reed looks like, but you kind of wish you'd met one. There's also the matter of the testing of tip consistency, a process involving 10 scribes a marble board, a sample of goat parchment, and the blessing of a low-ranking bishop. The bishop, you learn, is also responsible for determining whether reed tips favor heresy. Whatever that means, you come across a fringe document from the archives of Abdera home to some of the most questionable paperwork in the empire. It claims that certain reeds, when used under moonlight, produce better clarity in legal documents. It also insists that these reeds must be soaked in donkey milk beforehand. You try not to judge. Every institution has its conspiracy theorists. Another paper notes that all reed shipments must be accompanied by a token, a symbolic offering to the imperial spirit of documentation. Lately, the preferred token has been a dried fig wrapped in purple thread. You've seen the figs. They end up in the offering cup, which is then emptied discreetly by a janitor named Mikhail, who may or may not eat them. He always smells faintly of fruit. You flip the last page of the reed file and affix your seal, a wax blob, with the insignia of your department, 2 crossed quills over a scroll ringed by a chain. You press it firmly, watch the impression form, and nod to yourself. You've done your duty. You've validated the reeds. You are one with the system. As you push the reed documents aside, you glance at your to-do stack. Next up, cross-referencing the shipment logs of goatskin parchment from Pontus with regional scribal usage ratios. Your soul exhales. It never ends. It just shifts. A gentle creak groans from somewhere in the office rafters, and you half expect the roof to cave in from sheer tedium. But no, it holds just like everything in this place. Rusty hinges, ancient schedules, weathered men and women who've been stamping scrolls since before you were born. All still here, dutifully shuffling papers into piles no one will read. You reach for today's assignment, sealed in the familiar yellow wax of the Department of Fiscal Reverence. The scroll is brittle with age, despite being marked urgent. You peel it open like it's a preserved sardine and begin to read. It's a budget report. Not a modern, exciting budget with graphs and footnotes. No. This one details in excruciating prose the exact annual cost of ceremonial shoe polish for the Emperor's Honor Guard. Evidently, each boot must be buffed, using a mixture of ash goat tallow and rose oil. Rose oil imported from Antioch, no less. The imperial toe must gleam. The report includes the cost of transporting the rose oil by donkey, storing it in marble jars, and hiring monks to stir it counterclockwise under moonlight to prevent spoilage. No one's entirely sure if that part's symbolic or if the monks just negotiated a weird union clause. Your job today is to verify whether this shoe gleam initiative overspent by more than 3 dinars in Q3. You read the same numbers 5 times. You feel like your brain is melting into the ink blotter. Across the office, someone lets out a slow sigh, so long and tragic it could be mistaken for a death rattle. You sip from your wine again. It's been refilled, probably by that silent boy from supplies, who always appears right before despair hits. You nod in thanks. He doesn't nod back. He never does. He just vanishes, like some kind of bureaucratic fairy. You return to the report. There's a marginal note written in a rushed, panicked script. Adjusted figures reflect ceremonial emergency in July. Imperial pigeon defecated on left boot during inspection. You blink. Reread. It's real. There's even a sub-report attached documenting the incident. Apparently, the pigeon in question was not of the authorized flight path, which raises a troubling possibility there are authorized pigeons. You make a mental note to investigate that later. The Emperor, it turns out, maintains an entire pigeon oversight committee. You've never met anyone on it. But now that you know they exist, you feel oddly betrayed. Someone out there is in charge of winged interlopers, and you're stuck reconciling boot oil costs. Historians still argue whether the pigeon incident was exaggerated to justify excess spending, or if it became infamous enough to justify a budget line item of its own. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, just like everything in this empire. You file your findings under allowable imperial discretion and seal the scroll shut with the deep blue wax of your rank. The wax is slightly softer than yesterday's batch. The ratio of beeswax to dye must have shifted. You write a note for quality control. Your next file is labeled Banquet Seating Correction, Spring Solstice Ceremony. It's exactly as riveting as it sounds. You scan the parchment. It includes diagrams, literal seating charts, showing the assigned chairs for over 200 guests, each one identified by title, bloodline, robe pattern number of previous banquets attended and proximity to the imperial bread loaf. No one may sit closer to the loaf than the Grand Logothete unless they hold dual religious and administrative office and have at least one living parent. Yes, that's a real clause. You snort. You shouldn't. You do it anyway. One diagram has been amended with what looks like a rage-driven stroke of ink. An assistant Logothete was seated beside a minor baroness, who allegedly insulted his scrollwork at a prior gathering. He filed a complaint, a very formal one. You skim the complaint. It includes phrases like emotional parchment damage and unjustified smirking. You sigh and place it on the growing pile of banquet-based emotional crises. There's a lot of them. As you reorganize your desk, your fingers brush the edge of a parchment labeled Imperial Chicken Expenses. You freeze. Oh no, not again. You remember this one, or its cousin, or the version involving geese. Either way, it's back. It details the feeding, training, and housing of ceremonial chickens kept in the Eastern Gardens. Why ceremonial chickens, no one knows. The original justification is lost to time. All you know is that they cost more than some minor fortresses. You skim the expenses. Items include tunic liners for avian comfort, lavender oil for feather shine, therapeutic music during molting. You pause at the last one. There's an attached receipt for a harpist, paid to play lullabies for chickens. You lean back in your chair and stare at the ceiling. This is your life, and you kind of love it. Not because it makes sense, nothing does here, but because it's yours. Somewhere between the reed inspections and chicken therapy lies a strange shimmering truth. This empire may be ridiculous, but it's thoroughly ridiculous, passionately ridiculous, organized in its absurdity. And that, oddly enough, brings comfort. Still, there are moments, dark moments, like the day you received a request to create a 3-part form justifying the existence of another form. The resulting paperwork loop caused 3 scribes to faint and 1 to renounce literacy altogether. He now lives in a cave outside Nicomedia, carving birds into stone and refusing to speak in vowels. You cap your inkwell and rub your eyes. The sun has begun to dip. Shadows lengthen across the marble floor, and the golden light slants through the window, turning dust motes into tiny floating lanterns. A bell rings in the distance, not a church bell, a schedule bell. Time to switch tasks. You file the last of your budget scrolls and glance at tomorrow's list. It includes salt inventory discrepancy, Sardinian region, ink blot training results, class of 902, policy review minimum feather count in quills. You nod, all perfectly normal. Just another day in the Byzantine bureaucracy. By the time you reach your desk the next morning, someone has already kindly stacked your new assignments into an ominous tower that leans slightly to the left, as if warning you in advance, abandon all hope. You take a deep breath, adjust your wax stamp ring, and select the scroll on top. It's labeled Clarification of Imperial Purple Distribution Protocols. Oh no, not the purple again. You remember the last time this came up, 4 officials nearly came to blows over whether a ceremonial sash from Thessaloniki was imperial violet or merely ambitious lilac. You hadn't recovered emotionally for a week. You break the seal slowly. Inside a meticulous report unspools the allocation and verification of purple dyes, which, as you know all too well, are reserved for the emperor, his closest kin, and exactly 1 blessed duck that appears annually during the Feast of Colors. No one is allowed to touch the duck. You learned that the hard way. The duck has its own handler, its own embroidered pillow, and its own complaint form AV-1991, Avian Displeasure Report. You shuffle through the attachments. 1 is a swatch comparison guide, 12 shades of purple, ranging from imperial midnight to haughty plum. You're to assess whether certain provinces have violated dye privilege. A merchant in Ephesus has apparently dyed his tent awning in suspicious mulberry. Someone snitched. There are sketches. You admire the level of detail. And so begins your descent into dye surveillance. 1 memo includes a field report from a dye inspector named Dorothea, who writes with dramatic flair, "The awning flutters like forbidden silk whispering treason into the marketplace." I recommend seizure. Historians still argue whether the purple dye obsession was about power economy or sheer theatricality. What's certain is that purple made people weird. The dye itself, Tyrian purple, was made from tiny sea snails, specifically Murex brandaris. Each drop of dye required hundreds of snails crushed and fermented under the Mediterranean sun. The smell was allegedly atrocious. 1 report from a coastal dye works describes it as a divine wrought sacred to the emperor's dignity. You try not to gag. You examine a tax scroll listing dye imports. 1 entry reads Murex shells. Slightly aggressive, arrived with attitude. Contained. You choose not to investigate further. Part of your duty today is to track unauthorized use of purple thread in provincial uniforms. You're handed a roster of local magistrates whose robes are under review. The list is long. 1 particularly daring official in Bithynia has begun wearing purple cuffs on casual Fridays. You sigh. You know where this leads. Soon, someone will request an investigation into cuff intent, whether it's a sincere tribute or a deliberate usurpation of color hierarchy. And if it is, brace yourself for a full-scale cultural fabric reassessment subcommittee meeting. With snacks, but the boring kind. You file the scroll, but your mind lingers on purple. Why do humans do this? Why does a color make us feel powerful? Maybe it's scarcity. Maybe it's control. Maybe it's just that when you're part of an empire, this big wearing a rare color feels like a way to shout in the void. You reach for the next document, an even older scroll that crackles under your fingertips. The title reads, Guidelines for Imperial Ink Preparation and the Role of Sacred Darkness. A chill runs through you. The Sacred Darkness clause again. Ink, you know, is no small matter here. The formula for official ink used only for decrees and executions has been passed down through generations, guarded by a cabal of scribes who work only by candlelight and speak exclusively in passive voice. This scroll outlines the ingredients: oak gall, copper salts, soot from censers used only during solar eclipses, water from a spring that whispers. You glance at the margin where someone has scribbled. Could we use regular soot if it's a cloudy day? The answer presumably was no. Part of your assignment is to validate that regional ink supplies meet the minimum standards for imperial gravitas. This includes viscosity tests, darkness calibration, and aroma control. One batch from Paphlagonia failed after being described as emotionally bland. That's a real metric now. There's even a scale. You shake your head. Somewhere a goat is probably being blamed for this. You move on to an addendum titled Ink Emergency Protocols. It outlines what happens if a capital city runs out of official ink. The answer: panic mostly, then a call to the ink crisis team, who arrive in capes that billow dramatically whether or not there's wind. A field note catches your eye. It describes a moment during a siege when official ink supplies ran dry. Rather than halt the issuance of orders, a scribe named Iosif mixed soot and wine, whispering apologies to both. The resulting ink was deemed too joyful. His documents were burned. He was promoted. Historians still argue whether this event was a demonstration of creative resilience or bureaucratic heresy. You kind of think it was both. At this point in your day, you've stopped checking the time. The candles on your desk have melted into surreal wax stalagmites. You now exist outside of linear time, suspended in a purgatory of color codes and ink reports. Your only anchor is the steady scratch of your stylus and the occasional groan of an overworked colleague stretching his back like an arthritic panther. Someone drops a scroll across the room. No one helps. Helping is not procedure. Just when you think it's safe to stretch, another form lands on your desk, Form R72. Investigation request into alleged excessive use of gold leaf in the Office of Imperial Titles. Gold leaf. Wonderful. You skim the accusation. A junior herald has apparently been applying decorative accents to his departmental memos. Tiny gold sun stars and once a unicorn. The claim is that such embellishments create confusion over the formality of his communications. You're asked to determine whether this violates subsection 9.3 of the Plain Document Code, which mandates that internal communication be visually obedient. You chuckle, then you remember you're supposed to take this seriously. So you write gold leaf application inconsistent with norms of scribal humility. Recommend retraining and reduction in sparkle. You glance at your pending pile. It has grown. You swear it wasn't this tall an hour ago. It now includes feather quality evaluation Northern Province, faint sigh audit logs level 3, scribes only. Request for update silence duration standards in archival wings. Each one is vital, each one is painful. You sigh, a level 3 sigh for the record, just within acceptable limits. And just before the candle goes out, you whisper to yourself, you are the keeper of ink and shadow of dye. and protocol of purple justice, and the sacred sigh. You are a cog in a machine made of scrolls, and that machine is humming. There's a stillness in the office today, the kind that makes you think something must be wrong. Not urgent memo wrong, no shouting, no bells, but that eerie kind of wrong where nobody has knocked over a scroll pile in 2 hours, and even the candle wax seems to drip more cautiously. You peer around your desk divider. Nothing, just rows of scribes hunched like gargoyles over their parchment styluses whispering against aged fibers. You shift back and pick up today's top scroll, which comes with the dreaded green wax seal, Byzantine provincial map revisions, and official nomenclature review. You groan. It's map day, and not the fun kind with monsters in the margins or artistic compass roses. No, this is the drudgery of boundary disputes, district renamings, and the occasional fight over a hill that nobody even wants. The Byzantines take borders very seriously, especially the kind no one's ever physically visited. You unroll the scroll and see the familiar hand-inked lattice of provincial zones. One corner has been re-scratched 5 times, apparently, due to a long-standing argument over whether a village called Glykon on the Marsh should be counted as part of the Western Floodplain or the Eastern Minor Irrigation Authority. One clerk has included a footnote: the marsh has not existed since the 870s. We continue the debate in its honor. And that's the heart of it, isn't it? Nothing is too small to merit classification here. Everything, every field, stream, street corner, or goat track is documented, because where there is land, there is jurisdiction, and where there is jurisdiction, there are titles. Titles are half the empire's obsession. That Marsh Village debate. At least 2 people are trying to get promoted off it. One wants to become deputy of rehydrated lands. The other is vying for the newly invented position of honorary demarcation specialist. Historians still argue whether these title creep phenomena served genuine administrative clarity or were just a form of subtle competition, bureaucratic peacocking. One thing's clear: nobody here wants to just be a scribe. They want to be a scribe of Daylight Revisions Subdivision C with the right to wear a special feather. And speaking of feathers, your next task is a cross-reference of avian insignia. Yes, that's a thing. The Empire is very particular about bird symbolism. There are eagles, yes, but also hawks, swans, pelicans, and something called the Lesser Winged Authority heron. Each one has a distinct meaning, color scheme, and legal jurisdiction. You read the assignment. Due to multiple incidents involving duplicate bird crests across overlapping departments, please verify which units may retain usage of the crimson-beaked owl, formerly used by the Grain Oversight Wing, but now claimed by the Taxation Mercantile Review Board. You sigh. It's the second owl dispute this month. Attached is a formal complaint from a tax assessor in Dyrrachium, who claims the grain officials are spiritually unworthy of owl symbolism, citing their general sloppiness and insufficient hooting. You don't know whether to laugh or cry. You flip to the owl use registry. Yes, it exists. There are strict rules. No owl may be depicted with both wings raised unless the department has imperial blessing. Beak color reflects budgetary independence. A sideways glance is considered overly ambitious unless the office is classified Tier Faux or above. You jot down a ruling grain oversight may retain owl crest if they revert to passive gaze and remove talon accents. That should keep everyone hooting in harmony. The next scroll looks innocent enough. Proposed street renaming for the District of Dust. But you know better. This is a minefield. Street names in Byzantium are treated like heirlooms, sometimes literally. There are laws protecting the historical dignity of a road's name, even if that road is now a muddy alley between two collapsed bathhouses. You scan the proposals. Old Mill Street to be renamed Street of Eternal Accounting. Goat Passage to be changed to Path of Harmonized Ledgers. Unnamed dirt span up for promotion to Via Notabilis Logothetai. The requests come with statements from local officials, claiming these new names will uplift morale and reflect current administrative excellence. You've seen this before. Someone wants to make a name for themselves, literally by renaming something minor with maximum grandeur. You look for public feedback. One citizen has scrawled in the margin, "No one here even has ledgers. We walk goats and avoid the mud." Another simply wrote, "Please stop." Historians still argue whether the proliferation of Byzantine street renamings was about pride memory or just people really needing to prove they mattered. There's no simple answer, but it did result in neighborhoods where every alley had a name like Honor of the Third Palatine Sandwich Decree, or echoes of policy, Utanine for Gesvedenbf. You approve Path of Harmonized Ledgers for now. It's silly, yes, but at least it doesn't involve livestock. You glance up at the ceiling, stretching your back, until you hear something pop. The light from the high, clear-story windows is falling, just so casting soft shadows across your paperwork mountain. A breeze curls in from somewhere, maybe a draft from the archive corridor, and rustles the uppermost scroll like a gentle taunt. You pluck it. It's a map again. This one includes hand-inked illustrations of canal redirections, one of which loops unnecessarily around a monastery. The accompanying explanation redirected to avoid disturbing monks during mid-morning contemplations. You shake your head. That's code for the monks bribed someone. You follow the canal line with your finger. It snakes through farmland, a sheep enclosure, and then strangely directly under a small bakery that's annotated as producers of exceptional honey bread. You suspect this wasn't an engineering decision. You add a note, canal likely influenced by honey bread diplomacy. Recommend discreet review. That's how you write things when you don't want to get anyone fired or poisoned. Just before you roll up the map, something catches your eye. A marginal doodle of a cat curled on a scroll pile. Someone else in this sea of ink has also reached the limit. You smile. You're not alone in this absurdity. You lean back and close your eyes for a moment. Behind the pomp and titles and disputes over beak angles, you sense something quiet and steady, a kind of tired love for the empire's ridiculous, intricate web. A loyalty not to power, but to the game itself. The paperwork is the power, the stamp is the story. And so you stretch your fingers, light another candle, and reach for the next scroll in line. Because someone, after all, has to track the migration of symbolic storks across provincial crests. And that someone is probably you. The moment you touch the next scroll, you feel it. This one's heavy. Not physically, the parchment is light, the ink crisp, but it carries that unmistakable weight of religious administration, a category that makes everything else you've handled today feel like children's drawings on napkins. The heading confirms it: annual report, monastic licenses, holy relic inventories, and calendar synchronization disputes. You exhale slowly. Time to put on your serious face. This scroll, it turns out, is the spiritual equivalent of a Byzantine bake-off crossed with a diplomatic staring contest. It opens with an overview of how many new monastic foundations have applied for tax exemptions in the past year. Spoiler, it's too many. You count 37 applications from the region of Cappadocia alone, and at least 3 of them seem to come from the same goat shed, just under different names. You read the first monastery of the Holy Whisper, the second sanctified retreat of Whispering Holiness, and the third Goats Not Present monastic fellowship. There is, of course, a footnote clarifying that goats are occasionally present, but not in a formal capacity. This is classic relic revenue maneuvering. The empire allows tax relief for religious establishments, but the loopholes are as wide as a bishop's ceremonial sleeve. Each establishment is also required to submit a list of relics in its possession, which you begin to skim. There's the usual assortment: fingernails of saints, vials of sacred water, one very suspect feather from the Archangel Michael, still glowing slightly. You know this feather. It's made of dyed goose down and glows because someone stored it too close to fermented honey. You scribble a quick note. Relic glow requires investigation check for candied residue. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine relic economy was driven by sincere piety or a kind of competitive artifact hoarding. Probably both. The deeper truth may be that in a world where emperors rose and fell, relics offered permanence, tangible little lifeboats of the divine, preserved in velvet-lined boxes. Now onto the most dreaded section of the scroll calendar synchronization disputes. See, different monastic communities use slightly different calendars to mark feast days, saint celebrations, and fasting periods. The empire has tried, oh how it has tried to unify them, but monks are stubborn. Some follow the Julian calendar, others have hybridized lunar systems. One group apparently uses a system based on the movements of particularly fat squirrels. You stare at the subheading Official Appeal for Squirrel-Based Calculations. It reads, when Brother Theoctistos saw the plump squirrel pause beneath the fig tree, he knew it was Lent. You write nothing. You simply set the scroll down and breathe deeply. Part of your job now is to issue temporary synchronization mandates. Essentially, you tell everyone, just do Easter on this day, please. Whether they listen is another matter entirely. You choose a middle date, politically bland, theologically vague, and issue the following decree. All observant communities are to align with the majority lunar calculation, unless otherwise preoccupied by squirrel omens. Exceptions valid for no more than 2 consecutive years. You mark it with the standard stamp Official Religious Cohesion Provisional, featuring a dove circling a sundial. Moving on, the next scroll is an inventory but a strange one. It's from the Sacred Garment Registry, a bureaucratic side channel that manages the wardrobe of religious officials. You read inspection of ceremonial tunics, mitres, and sandals of blessed authority. This seems silly at first, until you realize how much power these garments hold. One robe. The mantle of Saint Lysander has allegedly ended 2 famines and turned away a swarm of venomous locusts. You recall that the locust swarm turned out to be exceptionally large moths, and the famine was, according to later reports, solved by a grain shipment from Alexandria. Still, the robe got the credit. The report includes a fabric analysis describing the mantle as made of finely woven flax touched up with intermittent miracles. You're asked to verify whether the current custodian, an ambitious bishop in Nicomedia, has added unauthorized embroidery. You squint at the inspection drawing. There's a new stitch pattern at the hem, tiny flame-shaped loops. The bishop's justification to reflect the burning passion of holiness. Your ruling permissible if accompanied by official passion permit, and no more than 18 loops per foot. And of course, no garment report is complete without a sandal controversy. This time it involves a rival cleric who has accused the patriarch's assistant of wearing soles with imperial-colored stitching. The assistant defends himself with a 400-word essay on the theological symbolism of red thread, claiming it represents the bloodline of ecclesiastical responsibility. You write thread color ambiguous, recommend browns until further notice. Your candle is flickering now. You strike a new one, inhaling the faint smell of beeswax and parchment soot. The sound of styluses scratching fills the room like soft rain. Someone clears their throat. It's your supervisor. He drops off the final scroll of the day. The label reads Compilation of Unauthorized Miracle Claims Year to Date. Ah yes, time to deal with miracle inflation. You start flipping through them. A loaf of bread spontaneously divided into 17 portions. An icon of Saint Zoe briefly emitted citrus aroma. A monk floated approximately 4 inches during evening prayer, but claimed it might have been dizziness. A cat entered the chapel uninvited, but remained respectfully quiet. Some of these are marked as plausible. Others are already under investigation. You pick your favorite. A statue of Saint Elias sneezed once. No further incidents recorded. You chuckle softly, then write file as unverified singular occurrence. Historians still argue whether the Byzantine miracle verification process was rigorous or completely arbitrary. Based on what you've seen today, the answer is yes. You finish by stamping your seal over the final parchment, a stylized hand in blessing encircled by the words, Deus Vult, but with paperwork. As the hour grows late and your desk begins to resemble a reliquary of unreviewed nonsense, you lean back and admire the sheer ridiculous beauty of it all. Here in the middle of the empire, amid saints and taxmen, and holy sandals, you find something oddly comforting. Even miracles have forms to fill. By the time the bell tolls the 7th hour, you've entered that strange trance state known only to seasoned Byzantine clerks. A mix of ink-fumed stupor, scroll fatigue, and faint creeping amusement. Your fingers move without thinking, flipping through reports, stamping seals, logging annotations with the dull precision of someone who's seen too many footnotes to care but still cares. Deep down, a little too much maybe. Your next scroll is marked with the red triangle symbol. That means interdepartmental jurisdiction dispute. You sigh. These are the bureaucratic equivalent of 2 toddlers fighting over a toy no one even wants. Except the toy is a rock quarry in the middle of nowhere, and both sides are waving copies of the 787 Imperial Resource Allocation Statute like it's the Magna Carta. You unroll the document. Sure enough, it's a doozy. The Ministry of Quarry Oversight, MOCO, and the Office of Building Materials and Urban Niceties, OBMUN, are locked in a 5-month argument over who controls a recently discovered vein of porous limestone near the outskirts of Thessaloniki. The quarry itself is unremarkable bad shape, hard to reach, and partially submerged every spring. But someone's attached a color-coded 3-page map, a list of potential statue dimensions, and a projected yield chart that includes the phrase maximum grandeur potential. You know what that means. Someone's hoping for a promotion. The MOCO claims historical precedent. Obiamun insists their interpretation of the aesthetic clause in the statute gives them artistic rights to all building materials within city influence. You scan the margins for notes from local inspectors. One just reads too soft to chisel, crumbles on impact. Nice color though. You consider assigning the quarry to the Department of Decorative Border Stones. But then you remember they've already exceeded their yearly monument budget, trying to build a statue of a former accountant who once properly sorted 500 tax forms in a single day. Historians still argue whether these jurisdiction squabbles slowed down real governance or were the very engine that kept the Byzantine state engaged. there's some truth to both views. After all, a problem you're arguing about is a problem no one's solving and therefore never goes away. It becomes part of the administrative ecosystem. In the end, you propose a compromise dual oversight. Moko gets the quarry during the dry season, Obmoon gets it when it floods. The limestone is useless in both cases, but the shared victory will keep them happy. You attach a ceremonial ribbon to the scroll, yellow, neutral tone, safe. Next, it's time for the forms update packet. These are dull but deceptively important. Every few years, the Empire revises its official forms, property declarations, religious exemptions, canal usage, licenses, goat ownership disclosures. All must be updated with the latest wording stamps and sometimes illustrations. You pull the first one, Form B32A, the application for livestock presence in a municipal zone of ambiguous purpose. It's now been revised to Form B32AR, with an added checkbox for spiritually symbolic livestock. You raise an eyebrow. According to the marginalia, the checkbox was added after a series of cases where monks claimed their goats represented the 7 virtues, and thus shouldn't be taxed or weighed during census inspections. You smirk. You've met those goats. One definitely represents gluttony. Another Form P90Q has now split into 2 P90Q rural and P90Q urban to account for the different values of moisture-dependent grain silos. The Empire, it seems, is nothing if not specific. You make quick approvals, only pausing to recommend one edit on Form S17D, Death of Clerk. While on-duty change final expression from anguished to serene if possible. After that, you dive into the dreaded inventory of office supplies. Ah yes, the true heart of Byzantine bureaucracy. Parchment quotas, ink rations, stylus reallocation policies. You once read an entire 11-page scroll about quill feather softness and how a drop in average softness correlates with declining scribe morale. Today's inventory reveals a shortage of green ink in the Southern Seal Division, leading to at least 14 misfiled notices and one nearly disastrous misunderstanding where someone interpreted a tax deferral as a tax defiance. You issue a rerouting order, all surplus green ink, from the Department of Agricultural Celebrations, who have used it mainly for vine drawing will be reassigned for critical, bureaucratic functions. Then you find a note that simply reads, Clerical Room 7B, missing 7 chairs and 1/2 of a desk. Suspected theft by Ministry of Sitting Comfort. You don't even bat an eye, you've seen worse. You move on to the most delicately absurd scroll of the day, official bureaucrat rankings. Every 6 months, the Empire publishes an internal list, a sort of performance review, crossed with a popularity contest, crossed with something that feels oddly like Olympic judging. Departments submit accomplishments, supervisors rate attitudes, peers fill out anonymous impressions. You scan for your name. Nope. You're not there. Again. But under noteworthy achievements, you find filed 812 reports with fewer than 3 errors. Invented new folder labeling system now used in 6 offices. Scribed for 14 consecutive hours without spill sigh or sarcasm. You know that last one's a lie. You sigh at least once every 20 minutes. Still, there's something endearing about how seriously everyone takes this. One scribe wrote a poem to accompany his self-nomination. Oh, ink my blood, oh, scroll my soul, promote me once, so I feel whole. You're tempted to vote for him on passion alone. Historians still argue whether this ranking system boosted morale or bred quiet resentment. Likely both. Some clerks worked twice as hard to climb the list. Others worked just enough to not fall off. A few sabotaged rivals by sneakily replacing high-quality parchment with scratchy, pre-used scraps. You mark a few standout entries for recognition. And then with one last tug of the wax cord, you open the final scroll in your pile. Memo: upcoming Bureaucrat Appreciation Week. There's a proposed schedule. Day 1, silent applause for efficient scribes. Day 2, showcase of exemplary seals. Day 3, ink conservation demonstration. Day 4, lecture on the evolution of folders. Day 5, cake. You underline that last part with enthusiasm. Then you fold your hands, stare out the narrow window slats, and let yourself imagine what kind of cake. Almond honey, perhaps, or fig-stuffed cinnamon. You haven't tasted cake in months, not since that one unfortunate filing accident near the banquet scrolls. Your fingers are stained with ink. Your candles burned low. You feel the quiet pride of a day spent well deep in the absurd, tangled, gloriously over-regulated heart of the empire. And even though no one saw it, you know you kept the Byzantine world spinning today. By organizing its quarry disputes, approving its goat forms, and maybe most importantly, by just showing up. You crack your knuckles gently this time, no sudden movements that might crack the ancient desk beneath your elbows. Your candle is giving its final shudder, and you decide not to replace it yet. Let the dimness have its turn. After all, the next scroll is one that's best read under low light and lowered expectations. The heading reads Byzantine Bureau of Titles Honors and other ridiculously long names. Of course, you settle in already feeling the creak of your joints whispering, "This is going to be a long one." The document begins with a list of proposed titles for mid-level bureaucrats who have either A, existed for a sufficiently long time without getting fired, or B, correctly used. The revised filing code trifold addendum. It opens strong. Assistant Deputy to the Senior Scribe of Imperial Slight Corrections. Honorary Overseer of Redundant Countersigning. Eastern Province Subclass. Scribe of the Second Seal First Copy. Minor Edict Division. You murmur aloud. They give titles for copies of seals now, and immediately remember, of course they do. This is Byzantium. Titles are currency. Not power, not land, just the right sequence of glorified syllables that makes you feel taller when you walk past someone else in the corridor. And oh yes, they come with robes, different colors, subtle variations. 1 stitch means honored, 2, temporarily honored. 3, under review for future possible honor if nothing dishonorable happens between now and next summer. You recall an incident last year where 2 bureaucrats nearly came to blows over who had more decorative stars of commemorative diligence embroidered on their cuffs. A quiet feud that lasted 7 weeks and ended when a supervisor handed the both of them a new title, Joint Guardians of Oversight Peace. Historians still argue whether Byzantine bureaucracy used titles to reward performance or simply to keep everyone too busy comparing their sleeve lengths to organize a rebellion. Spoiler, it worked. You now arrive at the section labeled Nominations for Title Modifications. This one's juicy. One clerk has requested his current title, Junior Scribe, to the Archivist of Variable Seals, be changed to Sovereign Curator of Seal Fluidity and Imperial Authenticities. You're almost impressed. That's some top-tier obfuscation right there. Another has requested the removal of the word provisional from her honorific. She's been provisional adjudicator of minor discrepancies for 7 years now. You approve that one, she's earned it. Then comes the absurd, someone wants to add of the people to his title, which sounds noble, except his current role is Supervisor of Document Weight Consistency. You suspect the people don't particularly care if their parchment weighs 1.4 or 1.6 drams. Still, you scribble, approved with footnote clarifying which people. Then comes the controversial category titles, retroactively applied. That's right. Byzantium, in all its glorious bureaucratic haze, allows people to submit paperwork claiming they should have had a title in the past and would like it recognized as if they had. One such scroll reads, between the years 823 and 825. Though technically a junior filing aide, I fulfilled duties equivalent to a regional indexer of notational cross-references. I did this quietly, and I ask only that my contributions be acknowledged retroactively. There's even a supporting statement from a long-retired supervisor. Yes, I vaguely remember him being competent. You approve it. Competence, especially vague competence, is in short supply. There's a brief detour in the scroll now, a kind of internal memo from someone within the Bureau of Honors, probably bored, possibly philosophical. It reads, we assign titles not to describe reality, but to create one. A man may be tired, bitter, ink-stained, and forgotten, but if he bears the title, Grand Harmonizer of Imperial Harmonies, he walks differently. And maybe, just maybe, he files better. You pause. That hits a little too close. You move on. The next segment is a list of titles that have been retired due to misuse, ridicule, or unfortunate abbreviation. Highlights include Keeper of Essential Notarial Tasks, abbreviated to KENT, and mistakenly thought to be a superhero. Liaison of Unaligned Regional Scrolls, LEURS, which sounded too much like a hiccup. Formal Overseer of Official Logistical Entry Systems. FULAs. Yeah, that one didn't last. Then comes the title Inflation Warning Memo. It notes that in the capital alone, there are currently 73 senior adjuncts, 89 imperial sub-vicars, 1/1, notaries of something, 12 people who all claim to be the last and final keeper of the archives. There is also bizarrely one person who holds the title Pen of the Quill of the Empire. You stare at that for a moment. A title within a title. Like bureaucratic matryoshka dolls. You jot a suggestion, begin title cap initiative. No title may include more than 5 conceptual metaphors, unless approved by a council of 3. Who are the council of 3? No one knows. They don't exist. Yet. But if you write it down, well, they will. You reach the final pages now. They list the ceremonial duties that come with specific titles. Many are as dull as expected. Recite the oath of efficient diligence at new scribe initiations. Inspect and bless the annual delivery of fresh blotting cloths. Host the yearly quill tip gala. But one stands out. Grand Archon of Scroll. Folding must perform the sacred crease at the Feast of Paper Alignment. You blink. You've heard rumors of this ceremony. No one actually folds anything anymore, but the crease must still be symbolically mimed. Hands in air paper, untouched, all done to the sound of softly tapping styluses. This empire, you shake your head smiling. And at the very end of the scroll, a single quote is handwritten in careful script. A name may be long, but it spares you the silence. You sit back letting that sink in, because maybe that's what all this titling is about. The Byzantines, with their labyrinthine offices and obsessive record-keeping, weren't just organizing, they were affirming. Each name, however redundant, however hilariously overdone, was a little candle in the darkness, flickering with the quiet dignity of being seen. And tomorrow you think you might just request a new title yourself. Nothing flashy, just occasional whisperer of quiet sanity. Your fingers have taken on the smooth callus of repetition. Fold red stamp, sigh, repeat. If someone were to chart your movements, they'd resemble a metronome, precise, predictable, and just detached enough to survive this paper-coated life. But this next scroll, it has a faint cinnamon scent. That means it's from the Department of Rituals and Ceremonial Precision. You groan a little. They always scent their scrolls. Lavender for prayers, cinnamon for protocols, mint for urgent clarifications regarding headwear. You've never quite forgiven them, for that last one still makes your nose twitch when you think of official turbans. This scroll outlines a series of upcoming ceremonies involving the imperial court, religious officials, and yes, bureaucrats. A new tradition has been proposed, the parade of processional stationery. You already want to nap just from reading the title. The idea, apparently, is to showcase oversized handcrafted versions of famous imperial documents. There's a proposed 10-foot version of the 783 grain tariff addendum, rendered in silk with gold ink embellishments. The idea is that children will watch, learn, and be inspired to one day author such great and needlessly precise decrees themselves. You smile. There's nothing quite like the Empire trying to market paperwork as heroism. Then there's a breakdown of how the parade will work. 42 clerks dressed in ceremonial robes of gradually deepening beige. A goat symbolizing humility and scroll consumption prevention. A reference to the old days when storage rooms lacked walls. Background chants in monotone Latin, verbum, verbum, verbum. Word, word, word. You skim to the margins where a bored junior scribe has doodled a tiny image of the goat wearing spectacles. You're starting to root for this goat. Historians still argue whether Byzantine ceremonies were sincerely spiritual or theatrically obsessive. The answer, of course, is that they were both. Everything here serves at least two purposes: function and formality, substance and symbolism. You scroll down ceremonial speeches, gesture counts 3 bows, 2 head tilts, 1 awkward hand flutter, and an alarming number of incense mentions. Ah yes, incense rationing. The Empire takes scent very seriously. There are entire departments dedicated to assigning specific incense blends to events. Bureaucratic promotions get sandalwood. Tax audits receive pine musk, meant to clear confusion, though mostly it just makes people sneeze. Dismissals are accompanied by a heavy smoky mix called ash of reflection. This scroll includes a complaint. Apparently, someone used the reflection blend during a birth blessing last week. The child is now nicknamed Melancholy Maximos. You flip the scroll and find an update from the Office of Time-Acknowledged Superstitions. They're revisiting whether documents copied at dusk should include a protective chant or not. Some argue it prevents smudges. Others believe it causes them. The compromise copy at sunset but hums softly, nothing lyrical. Then there's the matter of sacred archiving rituals. Once a year, select documents are ceremonially put to rest in the Grand Archive Crypt, a vaulted candlelit chamber where scrolls go not to die, but to retire in honored silence. It's ridiculously dramatic, but also kind of touching. Each scroll is walked down a spiral staircase, accompanied by 1 archivist dressed in mourning gray, 1 incense bearer, 1 ceremonial reader who whispers the scroll's title aloud 3 times before placing it in its slot. You've never been to a burial yourself, but you've read the reports. Some clerks cry. 1 once tried to sneak in a 4th whisper, but was politely escorted out for breaking tradition. The scroll you're holding now suggests introducing a new rite, reburial of documents reinstated after early retirement. Apparently 5 edicts were buried last year and then declared relevant again due to unexpected political shifts. The proposed process includes exhumation by candlelight, apology chant, We didn't mean it. Your relevance endures. Re-blessing with dry ink powder. You write a note. Why not just keep them in a maybe shelf? And then comes a serious matter, the oath renewal ceremony. Every 5 years, senior bureaucrats are required to renew their allegiance, not to the emperor directly, but to the principles of orderly procedure. You've taken this oath twice. It's not emotional, it's meticulous. You stand in a line. You recite the official vow. You press your hand to a polished scroll tube. You dip your thumb in violet ink and make a small spiral on a slab of marble, symbolizing the eternal rotation of documentation. There's a brief pause, a bell toll, and then you return to work. It's oddly moving. Historians still argue whether these oaths inspired loyalty or merely reinforced dependence on structure. But you remember the silence of those rooms, the way even the coughs felt choreographed. You remember the shared breath of dozens of people who, however ridiculous the task, believed in it together. You set that scroll aside and reach for the next ceremonial uniform adjustments. Apparently, someone wants to add epaulets to the scribe of seal polishing's robe. Another suggests cloaks for the night copyists, since moonlight deserves matching fabric. There's even a heated letter demanding less scratchy sleeves for the office of continuous annotation. You sympathize. There's a footnote. The Imperial Committee on Garment Dignity will review all proposals with the solemnity required. Finally, tucked into the bottom of this scroll bundle is a much smaller parchment, just a folded square. No cinnamon, no lavender. Just one line inked in slanted script. To file is to remember, to seal is to trust, to witness is to care. No signature, no stamp. Probably someone scribbled it at the end of a long shift, folded it, and left it where it might be found by someone who needed it. You smile. Because even in a world of endless ceremony, where everything is scripted, measured, and stamped, sometimes the most sincere things are the quietest, like that forgotten quote, like that goat doodle, like your own breath slowing now, in a room lit by fading wax and memory. The wax pool around your candle now ripples with the draft of an opening window 2 floors down. You don't need to check you've memorized the shift schedules by now. It's always the janitor in the silver-threaded tunic, airing out the filing room at precisely this hour. Not for cleanliness, for ritual, because airing the records is part of the Byzantine preservation philosophy. You unfurl the next scroll, on the management of silence in government spaces. You nearly laugh out loud. But then, of course, the Byzantines would regulate silence. The opening passage reads, "Sound is the sister of disorder." You picture a monk hunched over a scroll in total stillness, writing this with the gravity of someone revealing divine truth. And perhaps to him it was, because in the Byzantine mind, silence wasn't absence, it was order preserved. This scroll outlines protocols for designated quiet zones within the imperial complex. No casual chatter, no sandal shuffling, no sneezes above a specified decibel level. Scribes were trained to cough politely with their tongues pressed against their molars to reduce disruption. A minor but real skill. You lean back, imagining some hapless new scribe getting tutored. No, that's a Category B cough. You want the soft C-class nasal muted variant. Historians still argue whether this obsessive silence helped concentration or bred anxiety. Your opinion, probably both. The next page includes a map, yes, a map of approved noises. An audio topography of the bureaucratic complex. The Hall of Minor Edicts allows gentle quill tapping. The scroll vault tolerates page turning, but only in downward motion. The Treasury of Decrees has designated whisper lanes for spoken updates. The cupbearer's alcove, full talking permitted. They claimed it helped digestion. There's also a legend at the bottom of the map. It reads, areas marked in red are subject to the oath of audible abstention. You remember the oath. You took it once back when you were assigned to the scriptorium of duplicate originals. I shall breathe with purpose, move with humility, and let no syllable stray without intent. You never felt more dramatic in your life, or more focused. Next scroll. Chronometric standardization for bureaucratic coordination. This one's all about timekeeping, and it's glorious in its absurdity. Byzantium, unlike its chaotic predecessors, attempted to enforce minute-by-minute synchronization between its departments, which is noble, except for one problem: their clocks weren't quite reliable. Some used water clocks, some used sundials. Some used a man named Elias who shouted the hour, based on the sun's position and whether his chickens were squawking. So the Bureau created a protocol called the Unified Hour Chant. Every morning at sunrise, a bell tower rang, and officials in each department were required to repeat a 12-line chant while aligning their office candles to match the standard burn height of the empire's master candle, kept in a sealed case guarded by 2 monks and a nervous intern. You had to be there for it, people chanting in harmony, all staring at candles adjusting time by wax. It worked, kind of, until it rained, or the chant leader had laryngitis, or the chickens misbehaved. Historians still argue whether the chant was a triumph of imperial unity or a case study in performative punctuality. Either way, it remains one of your favorite memories. Watching a room full of clerks with furrowed brows, singing about the divine alignment of sunrise and seal ink. Next scroll. This one is unusually short. List of approved walking paces by rank. You blink. It's real. Apparently, emperors glide. High priests measured with divine hesitation. Senior bureaucrats. Purposeful 3 steps every 2 seconds. Junior scribes slightly rushed, but never hurried. Couriers jog-walk hybrid, unless delivering urgent ink, then full sprint. You remember once getting scolded for overtaking a prefect of postal accuracy in the hallway. Not because you were faster, but because his walking pace demanded a corridor of admiration and you interrupted the vibe. There's also a footnote: walking backwards is permissible during retrospection rituals. You don't even question it. Next document: emotional expression. Guidelines in professional settings. Here we go. The empire had rules for feelings. Apparently, too much visible enthusiasm during promotion ceremonies was considered gauche. You were encouraged to express joy via expanded posture and serene blinking. Grief, on the other hand, had a formal posture, hands crossed shoulders, low eyes angled toward the 5th tile from center. Not the 4th, not the 6th, the 5th. You snort. This scroll includes suggested metaphors to use in resignation letters. I step aside like a quill that has dried. My service fades like ink under sun. I bow like a leaf in autumn, curled but grateful. Poetic, overwrought, perfectly Byzantine. Then, tucked in the margins, a curious note. One clerk burst into laughter during an edict recitation. The document smudged. We burned it. He was reassigned to the chamber of measured breaths. You didn't even know that chamber existed. Now you do. Final scroll of the pile on bureaucratic dreams. You pause. This one's personal. Compiled by anonymous scribes over the decades, it collects snippets of dreams had while asleep on the job. A hidden tradition. They're oddly beautiful. I walked through a city made of ink where streets flowed and words flew overhead. I opened a scroll and saw my own handwriting predicting my future appointment. I was a seal, not a stamp, an actual animal. Everyone treated me with respect. I felt important. And the last one, in my dream, No one checked my titles. They just listened. You close your eyes a moment, because maybe for all the noise, all the formality, all the inked perfectionism, that's all any of them wanted: to be heard, to not need a title to matter, to walk however they wanted past 100 desks and still belong. You fold the final scroll and place it atop the others. The candle flutters. The janitor is closing the window now. Time returns to its usual stillness, and in your mind faintly the chant begins. Verbum, verbum, verbum. It's nearly morning now. You can feel it not by sunlight none has yet spilled across your desk, but by the rhythm of the building. A subtle change. The flick of sandals in the corridor grows more frequent. The night scribes shuffle homeward, robes slightly crooked. And somewhere deep in the compound, someone is lighting the first incense cone of the day. You unroll the last scroll in the queue, not because you have to, because you want to. It's labeled simply Final Reviews and Unsent Memos. These are the cast-offs, the never-delivered notes. Some were deemed redundant, others emotionally unstable, and a few were just lost lodged between cushions, forgotten in the folds of robe sleeves or slipped beneath cabinets for decades before being rediscovered by over-enthusiastic interns. Now they rest here gathered together. You skim the first one. It's from a clerk requesting permission to use blue ink instead of black for personal motivational headings. Denied. Not because it was inappropriate, simply because the Empire had run out of approved blue pigment that month. Another memo suggests developing a new department to review existing departments. A meta office, so to speak. The review panel rejected it, but then accidentally formed a review committee to investigate why, which eventually became a department. That you realize is how many Byzantine institutions were born, not by intention, by spirals. A note written in shaky handwriting asks whether smiling in the margins of official scrolls could be allowed so long as the smiles are modest. That one was neither approved nor denied. It was simply archived. With a hand-drawn smile in the corner, you sit a little straighter. Another document is addressed directly to future me. It reads, "Today, you hated your desk. You hated the creak of your chair, the repetition, the slow bleed of candles. But you wrote anyway. You copied the tax code for the 6th time. You approved a grain shipment with 3 typos and still signed your name. And that matters. You mattered." You blink once slowly. That scribe is probably long gone now. Maybe no one ever read their note until today. But here it is. Found. Seen. You thumb past a folded parchment held together with a brittle strand of silk. It's labeled "For the Emperor's eyes, then for none." You hesitate, then open it. It's not a report, not an edict. It's a poem. O empire of measured lines, of counted footsteps and documented sighs. Your beauty hides in footnotes and dust, in silence observed, in corners unswept, where clerks dared to daydream. There's no name. Of course not, because it was never meant to be preserved. But someone did anyway. Historians still argue whether such documents have historical value or are merely sentimental clutter. But you don't argue, you just nod. Because for you this is the heartbeat under all the marble, a whisper beneath the gold, the very reason you're still at this desk. Then from the bottom of the pile, something unexpected, a small envelope. The seal is faded red, cracked with time, but still intact. You break it open carefully. Inside is a card plain as parchment comes. And it says in tiny cursive script, "Dear Scribe, you have done enough, now rest. There's nothing else." You fold the card slowly and place it back in its envelope, setting it gently atop the rest. Because really, that's the perfect end. You lean back in your chair, ink smudges on your fingers, eyes warm with the weight of quiet history. The bureaucracy of Byzantium may have been sprawling ridiculous, sometimes hilarious in its devotion to detail. But beneath the silliness there was meaning. There was order when the world outside was chaos. There was purpose when everything else frayed. And now there is stillness. Word count 125, wind down 300 words. And so as the candle burns low, and the air thickens with the memory of parchment, you let yourself drift. No more scrolls tonight, no more forms to sign, no stamps to align. Just you in a room that hums with centuries of silent diligence. A room filled with paper ghosts and the faint smell of ink and incense. The kind of space where even time slows down, curling softly, like the corners of a well-used decree. Let the footsteps outside fade. Let the last murmurs of shifting robes and whispering quills melt into the background. The goat has gone quiet, the clock candles burn in steady rhythm, and you, faithful sleepy, witness to absurd rules and ancient rituals, can finally close your eyes. You've walked the echoing halls of a world obsessed with precision, seen the comedy in clerical excess, and felt the strange, gentle dignity in lives lived through paper, through stamps, through silence. There is nothing more to do, nothing to correct. You've been there, truly been there, in the quiet company of dreamers who called themselves clerks. So now sink into the slow dissolve of night. Let your breath stretch out. Let the rituals fade. Let the scrolls sleep, because you've earned your own little ceremony, a quiet goodbye to the day sealed not with wax but with rest. Shh, it's all done. Sleep now.